Let's talk a little bit more about how do conversations about mental health shape team culture. So we just talked about project grief. What are some other aspects or focus points that you think project managers should be mindful of?
I think one of the things to consider is the emotional labor that project managers usually have to take on, right? In terms of being the person who is kind of the glue that kind of holds all of that stuff together. Oftentimes you are getting not just the feedback essentially about the project in and of itself, but also how people are feeling in the midst of that piece. And so acknowledging that there is a lot of invisible work that project managers are effectively doing that isn't necessarily written into your job description. And I think being able to acknowledge that that even is a thing, that it even exists, can really be really create ultimately a culture where people can see other people speak up. People don't know what's acceptable until they see it, right? If you are in a space where people are openly communicating, sharing their concerns, but also providing solutions, you feel more encouraged and emboldened to do the same. But if you're in spaces where people are ignoring the fact that times are difficult, ignoring people who, ignoring the tension, ignoring the intensity of what's going on, then what you ultimately communicate is it's not okay to speak up, that this is not a safe space, and issues will be avoided. And so ultimately, it isn't just what the things we say that convey what we mean, but it is your lack of a response is also a response. And so by not kind of shining light on these areas, you ultimately end up skipping things that are necessary for people to, you end up missing out on opportunities to really kind of foster that in spaces. And so, in your own experience, when you've been, on teams, have you seen mental health kind of shaped in as part of a company's culture? And have you seen times where it's been done really, really well?
I don't, I won't say company culture.
Mhm.
I will say team culture.
That's fair. That's fair.
I would say team culture. And I've been in roles where I've seen it dismissed.
Mm.
Um, and then I've seen it to where it's celebrated. I remember one time working remotely, the whole team was off. This was in one of my roles. The whole team was off, and the whole team was remote. And the leader was like, "Everyone's off today. I think we need a nap." I was like, "What?"
Good. That's so good. Get a little siesta in here. I love that.
I was like, "This is magical." And she's like, "Okay, let's take 45 minutes. Whatever you do within that 45 minutes is up to you, but I encourage you to take a nap and we'll come back." Everyone came back on time. In the meeting, everyone was more alert, more aware, and productive. So I think a lot of times what I've experienced, just for me personally, is that mental wellness is a focus for leadership based off of their own experiences, their
Mm.
own needs, and I won't say that leaders don't see the value in it, but I think when it impacts them navigating burnout, that's like a frequent theme here in our conversation is burnout,
Mm.
but also just, brain fog, just, needing to take a moment to breathe, just to break up the monotony, back-to-back meetings. You're not really, when you're not scheduling any time for a bio break. These are real things that sometimes people are not able to do, but that does impact you, right? Because it's like, I'm so inundated, I don't even have a chance to eat or walk my dog or, take care of, nature's way, however. So I just find it to be a situation where I think leaders, to your point, which we talked about in this conversation, they model it. And over time, it becomes a focus because it's what's sometimes modeled versus said. You know, you to give them that 5-minute break in between, you schedule that 5-minute break in between meetings, or 10-minute break if you're able to, in between meetings, so they can read, they can eat, they can, you know, do whatever they need to do. I think that's critical. I think that it still has some stigma attached to it to a degree, but I think because different HR departments and groups, employee relation groups, you know, like, this is something that we need to focus on. I think sometimes people almost feel like it might reveal something about them that might not be favorable. And to your point, what does that look like? You know, like, how do you demystify that, right? How do you say, look, we all deal with this in some form or fashion, it just looks differently. I think that's where, to your point that, you know, that you were sharing earlier, the importance of establishing trust so you can have that conversation in a capacity that's comfortable for you.
Yeah. I can appreciate your point earlier too about maybe there's a level of this lack of awareness from leadership that comes from a lack of lived experience. And if that is not how you are, if people don't respond to a problem unless it's their problem in most cases, right? You know, a problem for you, if it's not impacting me, it can be oftentimes very, very difficult for a person to be able to fully understand and grasp the impact of that. It requires a lot of empathy to be able to do that when you're not in the situation and really effectively understand how somebody else feels. And so I think to that end, another thing that I think is important is this idea of being able for leaders to understand the very real and tangible kind of like benefits of being able to model that effectively, right? I think in some spaces people feel like, okay, that's just too much fluff. It's not necessary. It's kind of going to take away from the hard, tangible, concrete tasks that need to be done. But the reality is that when you are able to create spaces where people experience psychological safety, ultimately it improves team morale and it helps to reduce the stigma because people feel that it is okay for them to be transparent and be authentic. And that opens up further lines of communication. So I think one, for leaders to recognize that even if there is not a necessarily lived experience and there may not necessarily be a direct tangible kind of benefit that you're seeing, you know, by the end of this meeting, that doesn't mean that you're not creating an ultimate culture that's going to have additional benefits, you know, much further down the line. So I think that that's something also to